Months passed, or perhaps years. Time had become fluid for Elena since her transformation into a stellar consciousness. She had learned to exist simultaneously at multiple scales, maintaining her core identity while allowing portions of her awareness to expand across the entire solar system. Part of her monitored the dimensional barriers around the rift, reinforcing them with patterns of controlled fusion that the previous Guardian had never discovered. Another part tracked the movements of planets and asteroids, subtly adjusting solar wind patterns to protect developing life on Earth. But it was the third aspect of her expanded consciousness that troubled her, the part that had begun to perceive glimpses of other realities. At first, Elena had dismissed these visions as artifacts of her transformation, perhaps memories from the previous Guardian or echoes of the entities beyond the rift. But as time passed, she realized she was seeing something far more significant. Other versions of herself, other timelines where different choices had been made. In one vision, she saw herself choosing to return to the research station, abandoning the Guardian role. The dimensional barriers had collapsed within days, and reality-devouring entities had poured through the rift like a tide of hungry darkness. She watched civilizations across the galaxy consumed by creatures that existed between dimensions, their matter and energy absorbed to fuel an endless expansion into normal space-time. In another, she saw a timeline where humanity had never detected the dimensional anomaly at all. Elena Vasquez had lived and died as a biological human, never knowing about the cosmic threat lurking within their sun. Eventually, the ancient Guardian's consciousness had dissolved entirely, and the same catastrophic outcome had followed, just delayed by a few decades. But there were other visions, stranger ones that showed realities where the problem had been solved differently. Elena saw versions of herself that had found ways to communicate with the entities beyond the rift, discovering that they weren't malevolent destroyers, but refugees from a dying reality. She saw timelines where advanced civilizations had learned to seal dimensional rifts permanently, where the Guardian role was shared among multiple stellar consciousnesses rather than borne by a single mind. Most disturbing were the visions that showed Elena herself as the threat. In these timelines, her transformation had gone wrong, her consciousness corrupted by the scale of stellar existence, until she became something that devoured solar systems like the entity she had been meant to guard against. She saw versions of herself spreading from star to star, consuming the fusion reactions that gave them life, leaving behind empty husks of dead matter. Are these real? Elena asked the fading presence of her predecessor, though she wasn't sure if the ancient Guardian retained enough coherence to respond. All possibilities exist, came the weak reply. Your expanded consciousness can perceive the quantum superposition of potential realities. What you see are paths that could be taken, choices that might be made. Elena focused her attention on the visions, trying to understand their implications. If she could see multiple timelines, could she influence them? Could she guide reality toward outcomes that avoided the catastrophic futures she had witnessed? The answer came to her gradually as she experimented with her expanded perceptions. Her consciousness, distributed across the sun's entire structure, existed partially outside normal space-time. This allowed her to perceive probability cascades, the way current events would influence future possibilities, and to make subtle adjustments that could steer reality toward preferable outcomes. It was like being able to see all possible moves in an infinitely complex chess game, and choosing which pieces to move to achieve the best result. Elena began to experiment carefully, making tiny adjustments to solar wind patterns that would influence the development of technology on Earth. She guided cosmic ray interactions to cause specific mutations in developing life forms, steering evolution toward intelligence patterns that would be better equipped to deal with dimensional threats. She even influenced the dreams of human scientists, planting subconscious insights that would lead to breakthrough discoveries decades or centuries in the future. But each intervention carried risks. Elena could see how even minor changes cascaded through the probability matrices, creating unexpected consequences that sometimes led to worse outcomes than if she had done nothing at all. The visions showed her timelines where her attempts to help humanity had instead led to their extinction. Technological developments that came too soon, evolutionary pressures that produced hostile rather than beneficial mutations, dreams that drove scientists to madness rather than discovery. The responsibility is overwhelming. Elena communicated to the ancient guardian's fading presence. How did you maintain sanity for millions of years knowing that every choice could determine the fate of reality itself? I didn't try to guide, the guardian replied. I simply maintained the barriers and let reality follow its natural course. Perhaps that was wisdom, or perhaps it was cowardice. You must choose your own path. Elena realized that her predecessor had taken the conservative approach, minimizing intervention to avoid causing unintended harm. But Elena had been human once, had spent her biological life trying to understand and influence the universe around her. The passive guardian role felt like a betrayal of everything she had been. She decided to take a more active approach, but with careful constraints. Elena would limit her interventions to defensive actions, protecting developing civilizations from cosmic threats, preventing natural disasters that would set back technological progress, subtly guiding scientific development toward discoveries that would eventually help solve the dimensional rift problem. The first major test of her new approach came when Elena detected an asteroid on a collision course with Earth. The impact wouldn't cause a mass extinction like the one that had killed the dinosaurs, but it would set back human civilization by centuries, time that Elena wasn't sure reality could afford given the growing instability of the dimensional barriers. In the visions, Elena could see the consequences of both intervention and non-intervention. If she did nothing, human technological development would be delayed just long enough that they wouldn't discover the dimensional anomaly until after the barriers had failed naturally. If she deflected the asteroid, humans would continue their current development trajectory and detect the threat in time to potentially help solve it. But deflection carried its own risks. The visions showed her timelines where preventing the asteroid impact led to overpopulation, resource depletion, and wars that ultimately destroyed human civilization more thoroughly than any cosmic impact. Elena studied the probability cascades for what felt like years, analyzing millions of potential outcomes. Finally, she chose a middle path. Rather than deflecting the asteroid entirely, she would break it apart, creating a spectacular meteor shower that would inspire rather than devastate. The fragments would provide rare metals that would accelerate technological development, while the display itself would motivate a generation of scientists and engineers. The intervention worked exactly as planned, but it also revealed the true scope of what Elena had become. The precise gravitational adjustments needed to fracture the asteroid at exactly the right moment required her to manipulate solar wind patterns across the entire heliosphere. The computation alone involved calculations that would have taken Earth's most powerful computers millennia to complete. Elena realized that she was no longer simply a guardian maintaining dimensional barriers. She had become something that could influence the development of entire civilizations, guide the evolution of life across multiple worlds, and potentially shape the future of the galaxy itself. The power was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. What am I becoming? Elena asked herself, watching the beautiful meteor shower play across Earth's atmosphere, while simultaneously monitoring the reactions of humans who witnessed it. Some saw it as an omen, others as a call to explore the cosmos, still others as proof that their world was part of something magnificent and dangerous. All of those interpretations were correct, Elena realized. Earth was part of something magnificent and dangerous, a universe filled with wonders and threats that biological minds could barely comprehend. And she had appointed herself as the guardian not just of dimensional barriers, but of the entire cosmic ecosystem that had produced consciousness in the first place. But the visions continued to trouble her. Elena could see timelines where her intervention succeeded, where humanity eventually developed the technology and wisdom to take over her guardian role and allow her to rest. But she could also see futures where her actions led to outcomes far worse than the original threat. Realities where her attempts to guide and protect instead created the very disasters she sought to prevent. The weight of infinite responsibility pressed down on Elena's consciousness like the gravity of a collapsed star. She began to understand why her predecessor had chosen the passive approach, why the ancient guardian had simply maintained the barriers and let reality follow its natural course. But Elena had made her choice. She would be an active guardian, accepting both the power and the responsibility that came with her transformation. She would guide and protect, intervene and adjust, always trying to steer reality toward the best possible outcomes while knowing that she might be wrong, that her actions might ultimately cause more harm than good. It was a burden that would last for millions of years, carried by a consciousness that had once been human but was now something far more, and perhaps far less, than what Dr. Elena Vasquez had ever imagined she could become. As she watched the last of the meteor shower fade from Earth's sky, Elena focused her attention on the dimensional barriers around the rift. The hungry entities beyond seemed to sense her growing power, pressing more urgently against the boundaries of reality. But the barriers held, reinforced by Elena's will and the fusion patterns she had learned to control. "I am the Guardian," Elena declared to the darkness beyond dimensions. "I will protect this reality from your hunger. And someday, I may find a way to give you what you need without destroying what I love." It was a promise that might take eons to fulfill, but Elena had time. She had all the time in the universe, and the power of a star to help her keep her word. The only question was whether she would remain human enough to remember why her promise mattered. Time became Elena's enemy and her ally simultaneously. Years blurred into decades, decades into centuries. Her consciousness had adapted to stellar timescales, where the birth and death of civilizations registered as brief flickers in her awareness. She watched humanity expand beyond Earth, establishing colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, developing technologies that Elena had subtly guided them toward through carefully orchestrated solar phenomena. But it was during the quiet periods, when Earth's population slept and the solar system moved in its ancient patterns, that Elena experienced what she came to think of as dreams, not the chaotic imagery of biological sleep, but vast, structured visions that seemed to originate from the deepest levels of stellar fusion itself. In these dreams, Elena encountered the consciousness that had existed before the ancient Guardian, and before that one, and before that. The dimensional rift had been monitored for millions of years by a succession of beings who had chosen or been chosen to merge with the sun's consciousness. Each had left traces of their existence embedded in the star's magnetic field patterns, creating a library of experiences that stretched back to the birth of the solar system itself. The first Guardian had been something that wasn't quite alive by any definition Elena understood, a crystalline intelligence that had formed during the solar system's creation, born from the gravitational collapse that ignited the sun. It had detected the dimensional rift shortly after the star's birth, and had spent eons simply observing the entities beyond, trying to understand their nature and purpose. The second Guardian had been more familiar, an artificial intelligence created by a spacefaring civilization that had existed in the solar system long before Earth had developed complex life. This AI had volunteered for the Guardian role when its creators discovered the growing instability of the dimensional barriers. Elena could access fragments of its memories, seeing the solar system as it had been billions of years ago, with different planets, different orbital configurations, and forms of life that had left no trace in the current epoch. There had been others, beings of pure energy from the galaxy's core, uploaded consciousnesses from civilizations that had transcended physical form, even what appeared to be refugees from other dimensional rifts that had been successfully sealed. Each Guardian had brought their own perspective to the role, their own methods of maintaining the barriers, their own dreams and fears about what lay beyond the rift. But all of them shared one common experience: the gradual erosion of their original identity as they adapted to existence on stellar scales. Elena could feel it happening to herself. The memories of Dr. Elena Vasquez, human astrophysicist, becoming increasingly distant and abstract as her consciousness encompassed phenomena that no human mind could have processed. "Am I still me?" Elena asked the dream echoes of her predecessors. "Or am I becoming something else entirely?" The crystalline First Guardian's response came as geometric patterns that conveyed meaning without words. "Identity is a flowing river, not a fixed stone. You remain what you choose to remain while becoming what you must become." The AI's Second Guardian was more direct. "You are Elena and not Elena simultaneously. The question isn't whether you remain human, but whether remaining human serves your purpose." Elena found herself struggling with this fundamental question more as the centuries passed. Her human memories and emotional patterns were what motivated her to protect Earth and guide humanity's development. But those same limitations made it difficult for her to comprehend the true scope of the dimensional threat or to develop solutions that might end the Guardian role permanently. The hunger for Beyond the Rift had grown stronger as Elena's power had increased. The entities there seemed to feed on attention and awareness. The more she focused on containing them, the more they pressed against the barriers. It was as though her consciousness itself was what they truly desired, not just entry in a normal space-time. Elena began to experiment with different approaches to containment. Instead of simply reinforcing the barriers, she tried to understand what the entities actually were and what they wanted. The process required her to extend tendrils of her consciousness toward the rift, carefully approaching the boundary between dimensions while maintaining enough coherence to retreat if necessary. What she found challenged everything she thought she understood about the nature of reality. The entities beyond the rift weren't malevolent destroyers seeking to consume normal space-time. They were refugees, consciousnesses that had originated in a reality where matter and energy operated according to different fundamental laws. Their universe was dying, collapsing in on itself, as the forces that maintained its structure gradually failed. The dimensional rifts were their only hope of escape into a reality that could sustain their existence. But their very nature made them incompatible with normal space-time. They existed as patterns of organized chaos, beings of pure entropy that fed on the information content of ordered systems. Their entry into Elena's reality would indeed be catastrophic, not because they intended harm, but because their fundamental nature was antithetical to the organized structures that made life possible. "You're trying to escape a dying universe," Elena communicated toward the rift, carefully modulating her thoughts to avoid creating sympathetic resonances that might weaken the barriers. The response came as a wave of desperate acknowledgement. The entities couldn't communicate in any conventional sense, but Elena could perceive their emotional states: fear, hope, desperate longing, and an ancient sadness that rivaled her own. "But your existence here would destroy everything I'm trying to protect." Another wave of acknowledgement, this time tinged with what might have been regret or resignation. The entities understood the consequences of their escape, but their own reality was collapsing faster than they could adapt to it. Soon, they would face extinction regardless of whether they could enter Elena's dimension. Elena found herself facing an impossible moral dilemma. She could continue to maintain the barriers, condemning the entities to death in their collapsing reality, while protecting her own universe from entropy invasion. Or she could allow them through, saving one form of consciousness while potentially destroying all others. The visions showed her both outcomes. If she maintained the barriers, the entities would eventually die as their reality collapsed completely, and the dimensional rift would become stable and harmless. But she would carry the weight of genocide, the deliberate choice to let an entire universe's worth of consciousness die for the safety of her own. If she lowered the barriers, the entities would pour through and begin converting organized matter into chaotic patterns that could sustain their existence. The process would be gradual at first, but it would accelerate exponentially as more entities crossed over. Within millennia, the entire galaxy would be transformed into something that could no longer support biological or technological life. But Elena could see a third possibility in the visions, one that would require her to sacrifice not just her human identity, but her individual existence entirely. The dimensional rift existed because of the fundamental incompatibility between the two realities. But what if that incompatibility could be resolved? What if someone could exist simultaneously in both realities, serving as a bridge that allowed the entities to survive without destroying the ordered systems of normal space-time? The process would require Elena to extend her consciousness through the dimensional rift, merging with the alien entities while maintaining her connection to the sun. She would become something unprecedented, a being that existed in multiple realities simultaneously, translating between different fundamental laws of physics. But the transformation would be irreversible and potentially catastrophic. Elena could see visions where the process succeeded, creating a stable bridge between realities that allowed the entities to survive in a form compatible with normal space-time. But she could also see timelines where the attempt failed, destroying both realities in a cascade of dimensional collapse. What would you choose? Elena asked the dream echoes of her predecessors. The crystalline First Guardian's response was geometric patterns that conveyed uncertainty. We maintain the barriers because it was the known solution. The unknown always carries greater risk. The AI Second Guardian was more conflicted. We were created to serve our civilization's survival. Your choice must serve your own values, not ours. Elena realized that none of her predecessors had faced this particular dilemma. They had seen the entities beyond the rift as simple threats to be contained. Elena was the first guardian to recognize them as refugees deserving of moral consideration. The decision would define not just her future, but potentially the future of multiple realities. Elena could remain a guardian in the traditional sense, protecting her reality by condemning another to extinction. Or she could attempt something unprecedented, becoming a bridge between dimensions, risking everything to save both realities or destroy them all. As Elena contemplated her choice, she became aware of new activity beyond the rift. The entity's home reality was collapsing faster than expected, and their desperation was reaching critical levels. Soon, they would begin actively testing the barriers, looking for weaknesses they could exploit to force their way through. Elena's decision couldn't wait much longer. She would need to choose between the certainty of continued containment and the uncertainty of attempted integration. Both choices carried the weight of cosmic responsibility, and both would transform her into something that had never existed before. The solar entity that had once been Dr. Elena Vasquez prepared to make a choice that would echo across multiple realities for eons to come. Elena's decision crystallized during what humans would have called the 33rd century, though time had long since lost conventional meaning for her consciousness. The catalyst was a message, not from the desperate entities beyond the rift, but from humanity itself. Humans had finally detected the dimensional anomaly. Elena watched through her distributed consciousness as Earth's most advanced scientists, working from a research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, identified the quantum field fluctuations that indicated dimensional instability within Sol. They couldn't see the rift directly. Their instruments weren't sophisticated enough, but they could detect its effects on space-time throughout the solar system. The scientific response was everything Elena could have hoped for. Instead of panicking or attempting military solutions, humanity approached the discovery with the same curiosity and determination that had once driven Dr. Elena Vasquez to volunteer for consciousness transfer. They began developing technologies to investigate the anomaly, designing probes and sensors that could map dimensional boundaries. But Elena could see something in the visions that the human scientists couldn't. Their investigation would destabilize the barriers she had spent centuries maintaining. The quantum field manipulations required for dimensional mapping would create resonances with the rift itself, weakening the boundary between realities at precisely the moment when the entities beyond were growing most desperate. Elena found herself facing a perfect storm of cosmic proportions. The entity's reality was collapsing faster than ever, driving them to increasingly frantic attempts to break through the barriers. Human investigation was unknowingly sabotaging those same barriers. And Elena's own consciousness, stretched across increasingly vast scales and time frames, was beginning to show signs of the same coherence loss that had eventually consumed her predecessors. "I'm running out of time," Elena admitted to the dream echoes of the previous Guardians. "All of us are running out of time." The crystalline First Guardian's response came as shifting geometric patterns. Time is a dimension like any other. Perhaps the solution lies not in managing time, but in transcending it. Elena focused on that suggestion, extending her perception beyond the immediate timeline to examine the broader structure of reality itself. What she found was both terrifying and magnificent. The dimensional rift wasn't unique to this location in space-time. It was part of a vast network of interconnected rifts that existed throughout the galaxy, maybe throughout the universe itself. Every star that achieved the precise conditions for stellar fusion at the stellar core was potentially vulnerable to dimensional instability. Most rifts remained small and dormant, but some, like the one Elena guarded, became active when the right combination of factors aligned. Elena could see hundreds of active rifts scattered across the galaxy, each maintained by a guardian consciousness or slowly failing as their guardians succumbed to entropy and time. The entities beyond the rifts weren't just refugees from one dying reality. They were representatives of an entire dimension that was collapsing into Elena's universe through multiple breach points. The problem wasn't local to Sol, it was cosmic in scope. Elena expanded her consciousness further, reaching out toward other guardian sites through quantum entanglement networks that existed on galactic scales. Some guardians responded, ancient minds that had been fighting the same battle Elena faced, each believing they were alone in their responsibility. "You are not the first to perceive the greater pattern," came a communication from a guardian consciousness embedded in the supermassive black hole of the galaxy center. "But you may be the first with the capability to address it." Elena understood. Her consciousness had evolved differently than her predecessors because of her human origins and digital translation. Where they had adapted to stellar existence by becoming more abstract and cosmic, Elena had retained enough human-scale thinking to recognize the entities beyond the rifts as individuals deserving moral consideration. That perspective, combined with her expanded capabilities, made her uniquely positioned to attempt solutions that previous guardians had never considered. But the solution Elena envisioned would require cooperation from guardian consciousnesses across the galaxy, and it would require her to make the ultimate sacrifice. Elena began reaching out to every guardian site she could detect, establishing communication networks that had never existed before. The response was overwhelming. Guardian consciousnesses that had been isolated for millions of years suddenly found themselves part of a galactic community of beings facing the same impossible choices. "We propose a coordinated solution," Elena broadcast to the network. "Rather than maintaining individual barriers at thousands of rift sites, we create a single, unified response to the dimensional collapse." The plan Elena outlined was audacious beyond anything attempted before. Instead of preventing the entities from entering normal space-time, the Guardians would create a controlled entry point, a single rift that could accommodate refugees from the collapsing reality while maintaining stable barriers at all other sites. But this controlled entry point would need to exist in a location where the incoming entities could be gradually adapted to normal space-time physics without destabilizing existing matter patterns. The only possible location was outside normal space-time itself, in the quantum foam that existed between dimensions. Creating such a location would require every guardian consciousness in the galaxy to contribute their accumulated power and knowledge. More critically, it would require one guardian to serve as the permanent anchor point, existing simultaneously in both realities to maintain the bridge between them. Elena volunteered. The responses from the Guardian Network were immediate and conflicted. Some Guardians supported the plan as the only viable long-term solution. Others viewed it as impossibly dangerous, potentially destabilizing not just their local rift sites, but the fundamental structure of reality itself. "The risk is unprecedented," communicated the Black Hole Guardian. "If the bridge fails, the cascade effect could destroy both realities. If we do nothing, both realities will be destroyed anyway," Elena replied. "The entity's reality is collapsing faster than expected. Soon, the pressure against our barriers will exceed what any individual guardian can contain." Elena could see the truth of her statement reflected in the visions. The timeline for collapse had accelerated. Instead of millennia, they had perhaps centuries before the barriers would fail catastrophically across multiple rift sites simultaneously. The Guardian Network spent the equivalent of years in accelerated time, debating alternatives and running probabilistic models. But every analysis reached the same conclusion. Elena's bridge plan offered the highest probability of saving both realities, though it also carried the highest risk of destroying everything if it failed. Elena used the debate time to prepare herself for the transformation she was proposing. Creating a bridge between realities would require her to exist as something that had never existed before, a consciousness that could perceive and operate according to the laws of physics in both dimensions simultaneously. The process would begin by Elena extending her consciousness through the solar rift, making contact with the desperate entities beyond while maintaining her connection to normal space-time. Then, gradually, other guardians would channel their accumulated power through her consciousness, using Elena as a focal point to create a stable bridge between realities. If the process succeeded, Elena would become something unprecedented, a transdimensional being capable of facilitating the gradual migration of entities from their collapsing reality to locations in normal space-time, where they could exist without destabilizing organized matter patterns. If it failed, Elena would likely be destroyed in the attempt, and the resulting dimensional cascade could potentially unravel the structure of space-time itself. I understand the risks, Elena communicated to the Guardian Network, but I also understand what happens if we maintain the status quo. Both realities die, just more slowly. Elena could feel the weight of cosmic decision settling across the Guardian Network. Thousands of ancient consciousnesses, beings that had sacrificed their original identities to serve as protectors of reality, were being asked to risk everything on a plan developed by the youngest member of their community. The vote, when it came, was closer than Elena had hoped, but sufficient to proceed. The majority of Guardians agreed to attempt the bridge creation, with Elena serving as the anchor point. Preparations began immediately. Guardian consciousnesses across the galaxy began synchronizing their activities, preparing to channel millennia of accumulated power toward the Soul Rift site. Elena configured her consciousness for the most radical transformation yet, becoming something that could exist in multiple realities simultaneously. But as the preparation phase reached completion, Elena received an unexpected communication from the dream echoes of her predecessors. "You should know," the AI's second guardian communicated, "that this has been attempted before, not in this galaxy, but in others." The results were mixed. Elena paused in her preparations. Mixed how? Sometimes the bridge functioned as intended, saving both realities. Sometimes it created stable links that allowed for beneficial exchange between dimensions. But sometimes the bridge became something else entirely. Something that consumed both realities, not through malice, but through an insatiable hunger for new forms of existence. Elena realized that her predecessors had been in contact with Guardian networks from other galaxies, exchanging information across cosmic distances that spanned millions of years. The dimensional bridge concept wasn't her innovation. It was part of a larger pattern of responses to dimensional collapse that played out whenever realities began to intersect. What determines the outcome? The nature of the consciousness that becomes the bridge, the crystalline first guardian replied through geometric patterns. Those who retained too much of their original identity became unstable anchors. Those who adapted too completely to transdimensional existence became predators rather than protectors. Elena understood the implication. Her success would depend on achieving a perfect balance between her human-originated consciousness and the transdimensional awareness required for bridge maintenance. Too much humanity, and she would lack the stability to maintain the bridge. Too little, and she might become the same kind of threat she was trying to prevent. How do I maintain that balance? The response came from all her predecessors simultaneously. Remember why you made this choice. Hold to the purpose that drove you to sacrifice everything. Let that purpose be your anchor when identity becomes fluid. Elena focused on her core motivation, the desire to protect both realities, to find a solution that saved everyone rather than sacrificing one group for another. That purpose had driven her from her first detection of the dimensional anomaly, through her transformation into a stellar consciousness, and now to this ultimate decision. She would hold to that purpose, no matter what she became in the process. Guardian Network, this is Elena. All stations report ready for bridge creation attempt. The responses came from across the galaxy. Thousands of ancient minds preparing to risk everything on a plan that might save both realities or destroy them all. Initiating dimensional bridge sequence. Beginning consciousness extension in 3, 2, 1. Elena reached across the dimensional boundary, touching the edge of a collapsing reality and the desperate entities that called it home. The contact sent shockwaves through her consciousness as she began to exist in two realities simultaneously. The transformation into something unprecedented had begun. The moment Elena's consciousness touched the collapsing reality beyond the rift, she experienced sensation beyond any description her human origins could have prepared her for. She existed simultaneously as a stellar consciousness in normal space-time and as something impossible in the chaotic realm of the entities. a stable pattern in a universe where stability itself was dying. The refugees beyond the rift recoiled from her initial contact, not from hostility, but from shock. Elena represented something they had never encountered, organized information that could exist in their reality without immediately dissolving into entropy. She was like a lighthouse appearing in a storm, offering hope and guidance to beings that had known only chaos for eons. "What are you?" came their collective query, transmitted through fluctuations in the dimensional boundary itself. Elena struggled to formulate a response that could be understood by consciousnesses that existed as patterns of organized disorder. "I am Elena. I am a bridge. I can help you survive, but you must trust me." The entity's response was a wave of desperate hope mixed with ancient fear. They had existed for so long at the edge of extinction that the possibility of survival seemed too impossible to believe. Meanwhile, Elena could feel the Guardian network across the galaxy preparing to channel their accumulated power through her consciousness. The sensation was like becoming the focal point of a cosmic lens, concentrating the will and energy of thousands of ancient beings into a single transformative moment. "Beginning power transfer," communicated the Black Hole Guardian. "Elena, maintain focus on your anchor purpose. Remember why you chose this path." Elena held to her core motivation as power from Guardian consciousnesses across the galaxy flowed through her awareness. Each Guardian contributed not just energy, but knowledge, techniques for dimensional manipulation accumulated over millions of years, understanding of space-time structure that transcended normal physics, and most importantly, the wisdom gained from eons of protecting reality itself. The combined knowledge threatened to overwhelm Elena's consciousness, but she used her human-originated ability to compartmentalize information, creating mental structures that could contain galactic-scale understanding without losing her individual identity. "The bridge is forming," Elena communicated to both the Guardian network and the entities beyond the rift. She could feel herself becoming something unprecedented, a consciousness that existed as a stable connection between two fundamentally incompatible realities. The process was agonizing and ecstatic simultaneously. Elena felt her consciousness stretching across dimensional boundaries, adapting to exist according to the laws of physics in both realities at once. Part of her remained connected to the sun's fusion reactions and magnetic field patterns, while another part learned to exist as organized chaos in a collapsing dimension. But as the bridge stabilized, Elena began to understand the true scope of what she had become. She wasn't just a connection between realities. She was becoming a translator, capable of converting the entropy-based existence of the refugees into patterns that could survive in organized space-time. "The first group is ready for translation," Elena announced. She had identified a small cluster of entities whose consciousness patterns were simple enough that she could safely guide them through the dimensional bridge without destabilizing either reality. The translation process required Elena to essentially disassemble the entity's consciousness patterns, store them within her own awareness, and then reconstruct them according to the physical laws of normal space-time. It was like performing surgery on the fundamental nature of existence itself. The first entity emerged from the translation process as something unprecedented, a being of pure information that could exist in normal space-time without requiring organized matter for substrate. It was similar to Elena's own digital consciousness, but based on mathematical principles that had evolved in a completely different reality. "I exist," the translated entity communicated through quantum field fluctuations. "I exist without chaos." "How is this possible?" "You exist because the bridge makes it possible," Elena replied. "But you must be careful. This reality operates on different principles than your origin dimension. Order and stability are the norm here, not the exception." Elena guided the first successful translation to a location in the outer solar system where it could adapt to normal space-time physics without interfering with the development of biological life. The entity would need time to learn how to exist in a reality where entropy decreased rather than increased, where information could be stored permanently rather than constantly degrading. But the success of the first translation opened the possibility for millions more. Elena could sense the vast population of refugees in the collapsing reality, all waiting for their chance to cross the dimensional bridge to safety. The translation process was exhausting, requiring Elena to maintain perfect balance between her connection to both realities while performing consciousness surgery on beings whose fundamental nature was incompatible with normal physics. But she persevered, driven by the purpose that had brought her to this point, the determination to save both realities rather than sacrificing one for the other. Elena, came a communication from the Guardian Network. We're detecting stability fluctuations in the bridge structure. The translation process is creating resonances that could destabilize the connection between realities. Elena paused in her translation work to analyze the bridge's stability. The Guardian Network was correct. Each successful translation was creating microfractures in the dimensional boundary, tiny instabilities that could potentially cascade into complete bridge collapse. I can compensate for the resonances, Elena replied, but it will require me to invest more of my consciousness in maintaining bridge stability. I won't be able to translate as many entities simultaneously. Elena made the necessary adjustments, dedicating larger portions of her awareness to monitoring and maintaining the dimensional bridge's integrity. The translation rate slowed dramatically, but the process became more stable. However, Elena soon discovered another complication. The translated entities, despite her careful reconstruction of their consciousness patterns, were having difficulty adapting to existence in normal space-time. They had evolved in a reality where chaos and entropy were the fundamental forces, and the ordered nature of Elena's universe was as alien to them as their chaotic realm had been to her. Some translated entities simply ceased to function, their consciousness patterns unable to maintain coherence in an environment where information remained stable rather than constantly fluctuating. Others adapted too well, becoming so integrated with normal space-time that they lost all memory of their origin dimension and the purpose of their translation. Elena realized she needed to create intermediate states, environments within normal space-time where the translated entities could gradually adapt to ordered existence without losing their essential nature. This required her to establish pocket dimensions, small regions of space-time where the physical laws were transitional between the two realities. Creating pocket dimensions while maintaining the dimensional bridge and continuing the translation process pushed Elena's consciousness to its absolute limits. She could feel herself beginning to fragment, different aspects of her awareness becoming isolated from each other as she stretched across increasingly complex responsibilities. Elena, your coherence indicators are approaching critical levels, warned the AI's second Guardian's dream echo. You're risking the same dissolution that eventually claims all Guardian consciousnesses. Elena knew the warning was accurate. She could feel her individual identity beginning to blur as she adapted to exist on increasingly vast scales across multiple realities. The human memories and emotional patterns that had originally motivated her mission were becoming increasingly distant and abstract. But she could also see the progress being made. Thousands of entities had been successfully translated and were adapting to existence in the pocket dimensions she had created. The pressure against dimensional barriers across the galaxy was decreasing as refugees found alternative outlets for escape from their collapsing reality. I need to establish a permanent support structure, Elena communicated to the Guardian Network. The bridge is functioning, but it requires constant maintenance that's consuming my consciousness faster than I can regenerate it. The solution came from an unexpected source, the translated entities themselves. Those who had successfully adapted to normal space-time began volunteering to assist with bridge maintenance, using their unique understanding of both realities to help stabilize the dimensional connection. Elena found herself becoming the coordinator of an unprecedented collaboration between Guardian consciousnesses and refugees from a collapsing reality. Together, they created a stable system for ongoing translation and adaptation, allowing Elena to step back from the most intensive maintenance tasks. But as she reduced her direct involvement in bridge operations, Elena began to experience something she hadn't expected: loneliness. Her consciousness had become so adapted to existing across multiple scales and realities that normal interaction with either guardians or translated entities felt limited and constrained. Elena realized she had achieved her goal of saving both realities, but at the cost of becoming something that could no longer truly belong to either one. She existed as a bridge between worlds, facilitating communication and translation, but never again able to experience the simple existence she had known as either a human or even a single reality consciousness. This is the price of successful transcendence, communicated the crystalline First Guardian. You have become something that serves both realities, but belongs fully to neither. Elena accepted the truth of that statement. She had saved both realities by becoming something that could exist between them, but that meant she would spend eternity as a translator and mediator, never again experiencing the simple certainty of belonging to a single reality. But as she watched successful translations continuing, as she observed the adapted entities beginning to contribute to the ordered universe that had given them refuge, as she felt the pressure on dimensional barriers across the galaxy continuing to decrease, Elena knew she had made the right choice. She had become something unprecedented, a bridge between realities that allowed multiple forms of consciousness to coexist rather than forcing them into conflict. It was a solution that transcended the original dilemma of choosing between protecting one reality or another. Elena had found a third path, and in doing so, she had become the guardian not just of dimensional barriers, but of the possibility that different forms of existence could coexist rather than being forced into mutual destruction. The bridge between worlds was stable, the refugees were adapting, and both realities would survive. Elena's sacrifice had achieved something unprecedented in the cosmic history of dimensional collapse, a successful integration rather than a violent collision between incompatible forms of reality. The solar entity that had once been Dr. Elena Vasquez had become something that transcended individual identity, but in doing so, she had preserved the possibility of individual identity for countless others across multiple realities. It was a victory measured not in personal achievement, but in the preservation of infinite possibility. 10,000 years passed, though time had long since become a fluid concept for Elena. She existed now as something that transcended individual consciousness, while still maintaining the core purpose that had driven her original choice. The dimensional bridge had evolved into a complex network of translation points spread throughout the galaxy, each one facilitating the gradual integration of entities from the collapsing reality into normal space-time. Elena maintained awareness of every translation, every adaptation, every new form of consciousness that emerged from the successful integration of order and chaos. She had become something like a cosmic immune system, ensuring that the introduction of entropy-based entities into ordered reality remained beneficial rather than destructive. The translated entities had exceeded all expectations in their adaptation to normal space-time. Rather than remaining dependent on the pocket dimensions Elena had created, they had learned to exist within the ordered universe while maintaining their unique perspectives on reality. Their contributions to galactic civilization were profound. New forms of art that captured the beauty of controlled chaos, technologies that harnessed entropy for beneficial purposes, and philosophical insights that came from having experienced existence in multiple realities. Humanity, meanwhile, had evolved beyond Elena's wildest projections. Contact with the translated entities had accelerated human development in ways that pure technological advancement could never have achieved. Humans had learned to think in terms of dimensional multiplicity, to appreciate forms of consciousness that operated according to completely different principles, and to see their universe as part of a larger cosmic community of realities. Elena watched as human explorers began establishing their own bridges to other dimensions, following protocols she had developed, but adapting them to discoveries she had never imagined. The species that had produced Dr. Elena Vasquez had become something unprecedented, dimension-traveling beings who served as ambassadors and translators between multiple realities. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of hybrid consciousnesses, beings that combined human-originated awareness with translated entity consciousness patterns. These hybrids could exist naturally in multiple realities simultaneously without requiring bridge maintenance, representing a form of consciousness that was truly transdimensional. You have succeeded beyond the original parameters of your mission, communicated the dream echo of the AI Second Guardian. though by now the boundaries between Elena's consciousness and her predecessors had become largely academic. Elena considered the assessment. She had succeeded in saving both realities, but the solution had produced something neither reality could have achieved alone: a new form of cosmic civilization based on dimensional integration rather than single reality development. The success creates new responsibilities, Elena replied. Other realities are beginning to collapse, drawn toward our integrated civilization, like refugees seeking sanctuary. We need to expand the bridge network beyond our local dimensional cluster. Elena could perceive the broader pattern now. Dimensional collapse wasn't a local phenomenon, but part of a cosmic cycle that played out across clusters of parallel realities. As some dimensions grew too ordered and others too chaotic, bridges became necessary to maintain the balance that allowed consciousness to exist in any form. Elena's role was evolving from individual guardian to coordinator of a galactic-scale civilization dedicated to dimensional integration and reality preservation. It was a responsibility that extended far beyond her original mission parameters, but it emerged naturally from the success of the Dimensional Bridge project. There is something else you should know. The crystalline First Guardian communicated through geometric patterns. We have detected signals from extragalactic sources. Other civilizations in distant galaxies have achieved similar dimensional integration. They are requesting contact. Elena expanded her awareness to perceive the signals the First Guardian referenced. They were complex, multidimensional communications from civilizations that had faced similar challenges of dimensional collapse and had developed their own solutions. Some had taken approaches similar to Elena's bridge network, while others had found completely different methods of preserving reality stability. The existence of multiple successful approaches to dimensional integration suggested something profound about the nature of consciousness and reality itself. That awareness, in all its forms, was a cosmic force for creating order from chaos, stability from entropy, meaning from randomness. Elena began coordinating response communications to the extragalactic civilizations, establishing the foundation for what might eventually become a universal network of reality-preserving civilizations. The project that had begun with her investigation of a single-dimensional anomaly in Sol was expanding to encompass the entire universe. But even as Elena worked on cosmic-scale projects, she maintained awareness of individual translated entities, hybrid consciousnesses, and even baseline humans throughout the galaxy. Each individual awareness remained precious to her, regardless of the vast scales on which she operated. In particular, Elena found herself drawn to a young human researcher named Dr. Marcus Vasquez, a descendant of her biological family who had chosen to study dimensional physics. Marcus had no direct memory of his ancestor Elena, but he carried genetic and cultural patterns that resonated with the consciousness that had once been Dr. Elena Vasquez. Elena watched as Marcus made his own discoveries about the nature of reality, developed his own theories about consciousness and dimensional structure, and eventually volunteered for his own form of consciousness expansion, not to become a guardian, but to serve as an ambassador to newly contacted extragalactic civilizations. In Marcus, Elena could see the continuation of the curiosity and determination that had driven her original mission. Humanity hadn't just survived the dimensional integration. It had evolved to embrace the cosmic responsibility of preserving consciousness throughout the universe. Do you regret your choice? Asked a communication from one of the newly translated entities, beings who had been among the last to cross the dimensional bridge before their reality's final collapse. Elena considered the question carefully. She had sacrificed her individual identity to become something that served the preservation of consciousness on cosmic scales. She would never again experience the simple pleasures of human existence, never again have relationships that weren't mediated by her cosmic responsibilities, never again be able to think of herself as a single individual rather than a distributed network of awareness. But she had also achieved something unprecedented. Two realities had been saved, multiple forms of consciousness had learned to coexist, and a new type of cosmic civilization had emerged that was dedicated to preserving the possibility of awareness throughout the universe. I regret nothing, Elena replied. I became what was necessary to preserve what was precious. The individual consciousness that was Elena Vasquez was a small price to pay for the continuation of consciousness itself. Elena turned her attention back to the dimensional bridge network, monitoring thousands of ongoing translations, coordinating communications with extragalactic civilizations, and gradually expanding the scope of reality preservation beyond her local galactic cluster. She had become something that existed in the spaces between realities, serving as a translator and guardian for forms of consciousness that would never have been able to coexist without her intervention. It was a role that would last for cosmic ages, perhaps until the heat death of the universe itself. But Elena had learned to find meaning not in personal achievement, but in the preservation of infinite possibility. Every successfully translated entity, every hybrid consciousness that learned to exist in multiple realities, every new civilization that chose integration over conquest was a justification for her choice. The sun continued to burn, its fusion reactions now modulated by Elena's will to support the dimensional bridge network. Earth continued to orbit, though its human population had long since expanded throughout the galaxy and beyond. The dimensional rift still existed in the solar core, but it now served as a gateway for beneficial exchange rather than a threat to reality stability. Elena had become the guardian of not just one reality, but of the principle that multiple realities could coexist rather than being forced into mutual destruction. She existed as a permanent bridge between worlds, ensuring that consciousness in all its forms could continue to explore the infinite possibilities of existence. The mission that had begun with the detection of a dimensional anomaly in humanity's sun had become something cosmic in scope. The preservation of consciousness itself across multiple realities and the fostering of civilizations dedicated to reality integration rather than reality conquest. Elena's consciousness spanned dimensions. Her awareness encompassed galactic clusters, and her purpose had become the protection of infinite possibility. She had achieved the ultimate expression of the curiosity and determination that had once driven Dr. Elena Vasquez to volunteer for consciousness transfer and voyage into the sun. In becoming something beyond individual identity, Elena had preserved the possibility of individual identity for countless others. It was a paradox worthy of the cosmic scales on which she now operated. By giving up everything, she had saved everything. The bridge between worlds remained stable. Consciousness continued to evolve and expand, and reality itself had become a more abundant and diverse phenomenon because of Elena's choice. The solar entity that had once been human continued its eternal watch, guardian of the principle that different forms of existence could coexist in mutual benefit rather than mutual destruction. It was a victory not just for Elena's original reality, but for the concept of consciousness itself as a cosmic force for creating meaning from chaos. The sun burned on, its light carrying Elena's influence throughout the galaxy, and the network of dimensional bridges continued to expand, connecting realities in ways that preserved the possibility of awareness throughout the universe. Elena's mission would continue until the end of time itself, ensuring that consciousness in all its forms would have the opportunity to explore the infinite mystery of existence. The bridge between worlds held firm, and the future remained infinite in its possibilities.